Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to introduce Manuela Wagner. She is currently Professor of German Studies and Applied Linguistics and Discourse Studies at the University of Connecticut. She has published and offered lectures in a broad range of subjects, including the development of intercultural competence in language education, which she'll be speaking about today, as well as world language teaching theory and practice more generally. Manuela has a long history with the language villages and has recently offered several summer and academic year trainings on the CLV campus on the integration of intercultural citizenship and intercultural competence in world language education. So I'm delighted to have you here today, Manuela, if you'd like to get started. Thank you, everyone.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for this lovely introduction and for the invitation. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you today. So wherever we look, and this is from 2020, from fairly at the beginning of the pandemic, where the UNESCO really talked about the importance of cooperation, international cooperation, intercultural dialogue. So that's just one example. We see worldwide events where we really need to collaborate and solve problems together, complex problems together. And I think our students live in a world where they have to do it more and more. And it's not just to thrive, it's really to survive. But on the other hand, and this is from a colleague at UConn who is a philosopher and worked on conviction and intellectual humility, and I've been working on this topic as well. He and his group said there's so much disagreement about so many important topics, which makes it hard to solve problems together. And Paddy Ashdown, some of you might know him, a British diplomat who unfortunately is no longer with us, but who was in many war-ridden zones, and really he has so many interesting interviews online as well, videos where he talks about what we need to do to engage with each other and solve these conflicts or address these conflicts. What he said is the most important thing of what we can do is what we can do with others. And for me, that has always meant collaboration and action with people from different backgrounds. Collaboration and action with people from different backgrounds. Basically what you're doing right now. And I think we need to prepare our students for that. On the other hand, when, and I'm working with a lot of language educators at the university, in schools, it's one of my favorite thing to do, to really learn from language educators. But often I hear that they don't really want to go to these topics, right? It's difficult. The students don't have all that much language yet at the beginning. Now, if you look at the landscape, the political landscape, there are even laws that certain topics we cannot engage in. It's becoming difficult. On the other hand, we need to prepare our students for the world they live in. And I wanted to just quickly, and this can be very quick, just sort of a quick throwing out. You don't even need to ask to say something. What are some issues that you think we need to address in today's society? What are some issues that are important? Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, this is wonderful. I'm going to leave this for now, going to the next one. So what I had prepared, and we can go in different directions, of course, but I had prepared to think about the following questions during our time today. And as I said before, I'm so happy that we have other opportunities to work on this as well, because with everything we could go so much deeper, and we will have the opportunity to do that. How can educators guide learners along the journey of becoming intercultural citizens? And I'll, I think you read something already, but we will talk a little more what that means, in how I personally would define it, and how Michael Byram conceptualized it. What is for me important as well is the relationship between teaching for intercultural citizenship and social justice education. So we can think about that if you want to. How can we expand learners' language proficiency while also helping them solve real world problems? So those problems that we talked about, but also, the environment. I don't know if you probably know the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that the UN has, right? How can we help our students address these goals while also learning the language, using the language to solve real world problems? And how related to this, how can we teach intercultural citizenship in beginners language courses? Because in any workshop I do this is always a question. I'm told, students who have already quite a bit of language, they can do that. They can do the intercultural dialogue, but how do you do it with learners who are just starting out with the language? And we have had projects where we did that, so it's definitely doable. Here are some can-do statements, identifying connections between language teaching and the world beyond us, using the model that I'm going to introduce to you, Mike Byram's model, to language education, and hopefully starting to list objectives for education for intercultural citizenship in your contexts, however they apply to your context. That's going to be important. And I'm going to share, it's not a definition, it's something that I compiled from a long definition from colleagues from Hilla and in 2010. Some aspects that sometimes get forgotten or that are not always included. The most important one for me is that on the one hand, we have this definition of culture, right, that focuses a lot on similarities of perspectives and values and products, and but there's also the notion, and that's important to me, that I get there with my students, that culture can be contradictory, that it's not, that it's open, that it's changing, that it's dynamic, that it's liquid. It's not a static thing. There are these important aspects that were mentioned, right, with high culture, but then there are also so many other aspects that are constantly changing. We produce culture, and they are dependent on power structures. So culture can actually be used to exclude people. Culture can be used to bring people together, and at the excuse of culture, people can also be excluded, right? And that's actually important for me in classrooms when I look at how I talk about cultures and what cultures mean, that I try to include the cultural backgrounds of my students, to be very careful that they can sustain their cultures while experiencing other cultures and exploring other cultures as well. And that becomes especially important in contexts where we talk about minoritized cultures, right? Because there are hierarchies quite often that people have in minds, and it's important to explore those. So it's quite a complex understanding of culture, and by doing this work, by being an ethnographer, by observing, comparing, contrasting, that's what I'm trying to do, to give the tools so that students can get at those aspects of culture as well. Okay, good. So here just some thoughts, how I understand it, and then we're going to look at the theoretical conceptualization that Michael Byram created, and that has helped me in thinking about this. So for me, teaching for intercultural citizenship really means helping students understand their role in the world. When I go into a classroom, what I'm trying to do is I try to understand my students, and I'm trying to help them understand their role in the world so that they can engage in intercultural dialogue. And of course, when we do that, and I'm putting that here up front, there are some ethical questions that we need to engage in. And we again, I'm so happy that we'll see each other more often, that we can work on this. I'm working with a couple of colleagues now on a book where we really talk about these ethical questions that we engage in as language teachers. Okay. So what this also means is including, and I'm saying those things before I give you the example, inclusion of students in decisions about the focus of their learning. And I think in your cases, when you work with adults, you probably do that already quite a bit, right? That your students, as much as you make the curriculum because they tell you what's important, I do that from very early on, also from elementary school. It will mean, and that you will see that engagement with people from outside the classroom, again, in your case, that might actually be easier, which means taking decisions to participate in community life, be it local, national, or international. Just a few heads up. Things that we think about when we plan intercultural citizenship units, and I will repeat this again and again and again because it bears repeating. Here are some questions that we can ask if we want to teach for intercultural dialogue. When I teach my unit, will the students acquire new knowledge and understanding? I think many of you mentioned that, how important it is for students to have this knowledge and understanding of products, perspectives, and practices from another context, right? Another cultural context, and then relate it to their own. Will they discover for themselves? And that's sometimes not that easy, right? It's not always telling them, but really, how can they discover for themselves the practices of people in other contexts? And that means that they will be able to get different perspectives. If only I tell them, then they have one perspective, and I might not be the representative if I'm even from that cultural context, and that might not even be the case, and it's fine. But how can they discover for themselves? How can they compare and contrast these perspectives? How can they analyze and evaluate those products and perspectives that influence the practices? And that's difficult to get at. And how can they take informed action? And this will make more sense very soon, because I'll show you an example, a simple example of what we did. And I'm going to ask you about the theoretical connection. So you're going to be the experts very soon. Another something that I forefront is it's really important to be systematic in one's planning. That we notice that when we ask language educators, what do you teach when you teach languages? Almost everyone will say, yes, of course I teach intercultural competence, and of course they learn those things. But we really noticed, I myself, if I'm not systematic and intentional in my planning, it might not happen. So it's really good to have a framework. I'm introducing one here. We can talk about other frameworks. The Council of Europe came up with a model that's actually quite helpful that you might also use. There are other models that you can use, but having something where we are accountable and our students are accountable for the aspects that they need to learn is actually quite important. And for me, it's also important, like, I think Elena said that they're not only understanding, but they're doing something with it, right? So students apply their intercultural communicative competence in the here and now. Okay, so in before 1997, but in 1997, Mike first introduced this model in his book, and there was a second edition last year, actually, teaching languages for intercultural communicative competence. What he said was, when we teach languages, we cannot expect our students to learn this just as a byproduct. We need to be intentional about helping our students gain the knowledge, the skills, and the attitudes they need to be good intercultural communicators. I did a study actually a while ago with students when I said, what does global citizenship was everywhere, right? Everybody had in their mission statement, our students are going to be global citizens, no matter if it was language education, it was at the universities, it was in the schools, it was everywhere. And we asked students in Hungary and here in the United States, what does it mean to be a global citizen? What do you need to do? And the understanding in general of the students was, I'm a global citizen if I have multiple passports, if I have lived somewhere for a long time. And we understood, we learned, at least in that context, which is not necessarily generalizable, but that students tend to think they don't learn those skills in school or at the university or in classes. They have to do it, right? What we know, though, from research is that people can be bicultural or even tricultural, meaning being perfectly comfortable in different cultural contexts, but not being good mediators, not necessarily being interculturally competent. Because I can live in a culture and not be aware of the other culture at that point, and the other way around. And then I'm not necessarily the best intercultural communicator and mediator between others who have different cultures, right? And those are the skills. We need the mediation skills. We need the intercultural competence. And that's what we can teach to our students. And this model is actually based on students being ethnographers, really observing, right? Observing others. And so on the model on the left-hand side, you see they're on top there, the linguistic competence that we generally teach in the classroom, right? But then on the bottom are the intercultural competence components. Knowledge that we talked about quite a bit. It's important to have knowledge about other contexts, the artifacts, the documents, the history, the sociocultural components, politics. All these facts are important to know, right? But we cannot know everything, of course. But how do I gain that knowledge? And I actually strongly believe that rather than giving this knowledge to the student on my end, I want to help my students develop the skills of interpreting knowledge from information from another context and relating it, doing this analysis, this comparison, this hard work of interpretation, and gaining more knowledge that way. So those are the skills of interpreting and relating. Then also the skills of interacting with the material, with other colleagues, with either representatives of the language, be it first or second language speakers. It doesn't necessarily matter if they're native speakers or not, with a whole wealth of people in ways that they can interact with and discover new knowledge that way. So those are the skills of discovery and interaction. And again, that way they can gain new knowledge. In order to do so, in order to gain any new knowledge, right? And especially new knowledge that does not necessarily confirm what we believed, we need to be open-minded, we need to be curious, we need to have some tolerance of ambiguity, which are really also important attitudes of intercultural competence. And those are the attitudes that you see on the right-hand side here. And if you do this enough with your students on a topic, right? On a topic, because this for me is a lifelong process. But if I have one topic where my students gain enough knowledge from different perspectives, they interpreted and related, they were open-minded, they changed in interaction with others who they were, what they thought, then they gain this critical cultural awareness, which is at the center of this model here, and which is so crucial. And that critical cultural awareness really means judging something based on specific criteria, using your reasoning and looking at it from different perspectives is always what I add. That's so crucial to me when I use this model, that students have had the opportunity to go deep enough and now they make a judgment. They don't make a judgment immediately when they hear something. Oh, that's just weird. That's just odd. Oh, they do it that way. We do it this way. Our way is better. No, they suspend judgment. They learn a whole lot about something. And then they make a critical cultural judgment once they have learned enough, still knowing that there's probably much, much more to know, still knowing that they don't know everything, but now they make this judgment. So in other words, for me, the goal anytime I'm in the language classroom and in any other classroom is to not stop at, oh, everything is good, everything is fine, and I'm tolerant. It has to go further. We have to help our students use their criticality and really analyze the world around them. There's so much going on that we need to address. That criticality comes in here quite well. Okay, so just a quick review. Intercultural communicative competence are the linguistic competences on the top, plus the intercultural competence in the circle. That's together is intercultural communicative competence. The intercultural competence, skills and attitudes and knowledge we can teach in any subject, and our students can do anywhere. So we can actually really, how should I put that, use that as well to work with other colleagues, to use their life experiences and really develop those skills everywhere. Then in 2008, and that's what the green book on the top here shows, Michael Byram's book on From Foreign Language Education to Education for Intercultural Citizenship. Mike Byram, who is a wonderful colleague actually, and that we've done a lot of work together since, said, so what is the goal of education? And in most curricula, national curricula, the goal of education was actually to help students become good citizens. And what it meant was good national citizens, right? And so there was a lot of civic education, which was really interesting to him. But he said, well, in language education, we actually have the opportunity and perhaps even the responsibility to help our students become intercultural citizens. And that's where this comes from, intercultural citizens. So we actually have the opportunity in language education to teach or to help our students develop their intercultural communicative competence, combine it with an action component in the here and now, with education for democracy, to respond to the demands that are happening nowadays, right? The global demands where we need to collaborate much more. And that together, so that action component plus the intercultural communicative competence is intercultural citizenship. Okay. Okay. So it's a topic, you know, we've done it with different topics as well in other contexts. We did one with healthcare, which was really interesting as well. But I'm going to share one about sports. Sports and wellness, actually, it was about how are our activities linked to the model that I just introduced. Okay, so the role of sports in Germany versus the USA, and we then worked a little bit more on that to not just have nation culture and so on. We deconstructed it a little more, but I'm simplifying quite a bit to really get at the main aspects of the model. The partner school is in Bavaria. The students visit every, I think 1 year, the one school comes visit here, and then the other school visits there. They have this exchange program going. They've had it going for a long time. The teacher told us, Joan told us, you know, when the students come here, it's always good and they do learn, but so often they stay at that not being too curious about when something is different. They really want to say we are good and we are the best, and you know, it's more competition in many ways, and they stay at that's weird phase sometimes, right? Something is weird rather than looking into it. So what can we do? And what we did is we actually prepared this unit especially to get at that deeper level of thinking about something that's different. And we included, if you're interested in that later on, because we see each other another time, we included intellectual humility. I'm not going to show it now as much, but if you're interested later on, I can put that layer on as well. Okay, so here are some things we did. We asked the students from the American context to read information about sports in the German context and the other way around. And they did it in the target language because they were intermediate. They could also look in their own language, but we had some prepared readings for them so that they found out some more information about sports in the other context. And then we had reflection questions, and we hit that weird question head on. We said, does anything strike you as odd or weird? What do you find most interesting or surprising? What facts are perhaps typical for the culture, in your opinion? Can you identify one or two things that would not happen, that you would not find in your own context? And then we asked them to prepare a few questions for their partners when they meet in school. So what aspects of the model did we try to get at here? So if you remember this circle, what aspects of this circle did we try to get at? So our thought process here was, of course, on the one hand, we really got at the skills of interpreting information from another context and relate it to your own. So we really went after those skills so that they get more knowledge discovery as well, right? Often people say they also had to be open-minded to some degree, and I think that's true, but we cannot be sure yet. But attitudes might be another one we got at here, right? But knowledge discovery and interpreting and relating was our main goal with this activity. Is that clear? Is the connection clear to the model?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, okay. So now we move on to the next activity that we did. So I think, let me go back here. I think the question was, how can you expect students to interpret if they don't have the knowledge yet?
Right.
So I have to admit, and I might, I'm doing that quite a bit. I'm not a teacher who gives my students everything. I'm expecting a whole lot from my students, and even at the elementary level, because I think my students can be ethnographers, they can be researchers, investigators. So much rather than me giving them any knowledge, I'm actually exploring it with them. So I might actually, of course, and when I start out on a certain topic, I'm trying to learn beforehand about it. But I'm certainly not the one who knows everything about it. My students find out things that I don't know. So I'm trying to give them the tools to learn more about a topic. So I'm asking them reflection questions. I'm helping them make sense of the text, but they are the ones who interpret. And by interpreting this information, doing this hard work, they are gaining more knowledge. And again, I'm showing a simplified version here, but these are just some activities you can do. You can then actually say, so what do you know already about a topic? What do you not know? What would you like to know? And again, together we can find out more information and we can find out sources. So in this case, we actually together, first of all, they read a text, they watched a video, and then they asked each other. So again, more sources for information. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, super. So I'm going to the next one, where we said, now that you have asked your questions, right? You had prepared questions last time. Remember, at the end, we asked the students to prepare some questions for the others. Now, ask these questions to the people who are more expert in this, because if I'm thinking about sports in Germany, I didn't know all that much before, and I have people here from Germany, I have a pretty good opportunity to ask them something. What do you think about the importance of baseball in Germany? Is baseball important in Germany? Do Germans, so thinking about the issues that each student thought about. We gave an example of, quite often Americans think they are the best at sports in general. They're the best at everything. Baseball is boring. Might be that the Germans think rock climbing is only for boys. There's no racial discrimination in sports. So we gave some ideas of what students could now think, right? And this is just a preliminary, here's what I think now. This is not very critical yet. This is, I've learned some information, and now from this information, I'm sort of taking a snapshot of what I'm thinking now. What skills are we trying to get at here? Yes, very good. So here we really push the students to interact with each other and hopefully discover new knowledge, right? We push them to interact and discover. Very good. And also they have to interpret and relate, right? Still, when they get the information and the knowledge aspect. Very good. Thank you. So now, and again, this is very simplified because a lot happened in between. I'll explain this and then I explain some other things that happened. But now we ask them to be fact detectives, to go out and interview students to find out, is what I believed correct? Wahr? Is it false? Falsch? And what is my opinion now after I heard all that? So what the students did, actually, they asked not only 5 students, they looked on the internet. They found, for example, the German students found out that in America, if you're good at sports, you can actually get a scholarship to the university. And that was really odd to them, because that was not the case in something is going on with my view here. That was not the case in Germany. And so they talked a lot about that, right? And they looked online, what is going on with that? And that was odd for the German students. And for the American students, it was really odd. Why would you not get a scholarship if you're good at sports? It's really important to have sports. So what is the role of sports and in the society and in studying at the universities? How much do sports people who are expert sports people make? How much money do they make in different contexts? What is their social status, right? How many of the very famous athletes are from other parts of the world, and what does that mean? And are they also welcome if they're not famous? And so they had really interesting questions. They had a trip from Massachusetts to New York, and all that trip they were talking about this, which was also really interesting to us to hear that. But again, we asked them to now engage with each other and ask each other the questions, and then make a judgment what they're thinking. What are we getting at here? Yes, exactly. We're actually nudging them. We're nudging them now, after you have learned a lot about this. Now analyze and conclude about the other. Make a conclusion, draw a conclusion, right? And again, I shared with you before, we actually also included intellectual humility, helping the students know what they don't know. So we had activities where we made sure, even if that's your opinion now, you know a little more than you knew before, but there's a whole lot that you don't know yet. And we didn't tell them. We did that through activities that notion came up. Good. So then the final part was that the students talked about, well, how can we share what we learned here about sports and how it is different, how the values are different in different parts of the world, and what people do with it. How can we share this with others? And they did activities in their school where they invited students from outside of their communities. What I also didn't share, actually, this was an interdisciplinary project. The students analyzed the data they had in mathematics, and they did a statistical analysis of the data, represented it. They also did a project in the health club where they went climbing together and talked about climbing and the role of climbing and gender and climbing, and gender and sports. So there was more going on, but they then went out and shared it with the community. And that, of course, is what I talked about with intercultural citizenship, not only learning the skills, the knowledge, and the attitudes, but doing something about it. We have had projects that are more activist, right? Where, for example, if it's about awareness about something, students can write to politicians and do, or students can do a food drive, students can go into communities and do service learning projects. So the action components can be really quite different. Or in my case, students did a web page with what they learned and shared their experiences with people. Others tweeted about it. And so, you can do all kinds of action components. But the important aspect of this whole intercultural citizenship is that something happens with the skills, the knowledge, and the attitudes in the here and now. The students apply it to a societal problem of their choice. They choose it. The teacher never tells them what to do. I just wanted to share with you. So this simple example was just to show you how some activities can be linked to the classroom, right? And the order that we did is not the only order you can do. There are many different ways of getting at it. So the question you would ask yourself is, or the question I often ask myself when I plan for intercultural citizenship, how can I help my students gain enough knowledge about these topics? Where can I get that from? Can I invite a community member? Do they already know quite a bit, and can they share with each other? Can they do some research on their own and then share with each other? Can we invite another class and can they work together? So there are many ways in which they can gain new knowledge about this topic. The internet, right? There are so many resources nowadays. How can I provide enough opportunity for them to really interact with somebody from a different background? This is actually really crucial in a way. We need to engage with difference, right? And not only difference in facts, but also difference in values, in attitudes, and so on. So how can I get them to interact with people who have a different notion about this, and where they really need to negotiate a little bit their identities as well, their selves, right? So those are the kinds of questions I ask myself when I plan for this. Here's an activity that we can do. One would be to think about a unit that you're teaching or that you might plan, and reflect on what objectives you could have for intercultural citizenship. And I'm going to put a link in the chat, and maybe Sarah or Martin, you can share it with everyone, where it's a really short snapshot of a representation of the sports unit, where we share our intercultural citizenship objectives. We also share social justice objectives and other objectives that you don't need to look at if you're not interested in it at the moment. But we do share the intercultural citizenship objectives, and you could think about one of your topics and what your intercultural citizenship objectives could be. But I really like to plan backwards. I start out with what my students will be able to do, right? And then I plan backwards from there. So here's the link that I gave you brings you to this. It brings you to the essential question, to the unit, to the sports unit, to the essential question, which I think is always a good place to start. So if you want to do healthcare, what about healthcare would you like your students to know, right? That would be the bigger question. You can start with that. And then what I often do is I take the goals for intercultural citizenship almost, now I don't anymore, but when I started doing this, almost directly from the model. I said, how the students in the end, they will have interpreted and related information about the topic. They will have interpreted information about a topic and related it to their own. They will have discovered and interacted. They will have made judgments, and what kinds of judgments would I want them to make? So that's what you have to think here. And then they will, in this case, the action component was presenting information to the outside audience, but it can be something else. What is your action component? So if you start thinking from the back, from where you want to go, and then you go backwards, that will help you. Here, what you have is some activities that the students did to interpret the information. Those are just a couple of activities. What they did in the interpersonal mode, and what they did in the presentational mode, how they presented information. But that's just another way of thinking of a sort of summative way of seeing where they went with this. And below you have social justice, because we wanted to also get at social justice. So those are social justice takeaways. But I think the item in red here could be helpful for you to discuss in groups with our topic. What can we do? What could that look like with our topic and our cultural backgrounds that we're exploring? Does that make sense? So there are many, many models, and I'm happy to share other models with you in other presentations. There's one model, for example, by the Council of Europe. It's the reference framework for competences of democratic communication, I think, RFCDC. It's all available online. They did a really good job. I've used this model. I actually use it for our study abroad program. But the reason I personally use Mike's model quite a bit is because it's a simple representation. The RFCDC is quite complex. It has many features to it. And when I teach every day in my classroom, knowing what I know now, I feel that I'm accountable enough to get to the most important pieces that I want. And I use other models to complement. For example, the RFCDC has human rights in there as well. And it has values, you know, and the values, there's a human rights value. There's a lot about democratic values. So I substitute. There's also the Darla Deardorff model that's very similar to Mike's model, because she actually asked experts. She did a Delphi study, asked experts, and then came up with her model, which is quite similar to Mike's model. There are other models out there. I like the models that really focus on awareness. So most of them are educational models. There are also models for business, and some of which are okay, some of which are, for me, problematic because they mostly focus on knowledge, some of them, and I don't want to be I don't want to stop at the knowledge. I want to go further. That awareness piece is so important for me. Very happy to share other models. If there's the wish, we can at least have an overview at some point, and then see what might be interesting for your context.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Manuela, can we all?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm so sorry I cannot be there. I would love to continue the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. We will. Thanks so much, Manuela.
Have a good weekend as well, and a wonderful rest of the day. It was so lovely to meet everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.